Thank you everyone for joining us for World Oceans Day. For those who don't know me, I'm John Butler, co-chair of the Eastport Yacht Club Environmental Committee. In addition to Eastport Yacht Club members, we have a number of guests, including members of the Corinthian Sailing Association, of which I'm also a member. And in addition to our participants on Zoom, we're streaming on live to Facebook. Our topic for the evening is sustainable seafood in the modern American diet, how seafood can play a role in a sustainable future. I first learned of our speaker, Barton Seaver, 6 years ago when Diane and I sailed with another Corinthian couple, Carol and Lee Seaver, from New Jersey to Portland, Maine on their boat. During that trip, Lee mentioned that his son was into sustainable seafood. I say into because I can't remember the details of 6 years ago, but sustainable seafood was important to me then as it is now. Flash forward to a few months ago when we were considering speakers for our environmental lecture series at Eastport Yacht Club, and my co-chair, Virginia, suggested that Barton Seaver would be a great speaker on sustainable seafood. I knew that the Barton Seaver she was recommending must be Lee's son. I have enjoyed Lee's cooking aboard his 40-foot sailboat and know that Barton had a good start in learning how to cook. I have listened to Barton's TED Talk and know that he is an impassioned advocate for sustainable seafood. I think most of you have probably seen the flyer and read the emails regarding Barton's impressive background. Even though he lives in Maine now, did you know he is more or less a local boy, being born and raised in DC? Barton frequently enjoyed shopping with his dad at the Maine Ave Fish Market, known for its huge variety of seafood. He spent some summers down on the Patuxent on a farm near Sodderly Estate, where he would spend his days wading in the eelgrass for peelers, netting blues off pilings, and catching buckets of spot. Barton enjoys sailing occasionally with Carol and Lee and has sailed with them to Nova Scotia. We'll have time to answer questions at the end of the presentation that you can submit via chat. Now I'd like to turn the mic over to award-winning chef, renowned author, educator, and advocate for sustainable seafood, Barton Seaver.
Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Virginia, Nancy, everyone for having me in. Just want to get John, if you could give me a thumbs up. Are you good? You're hearing me? You're seeing me? Great. Okay. Well, first and foremost, happy Oceans Day to everybody. Happy life, despite all of the unrest and terror and difficulties and panic and pandemic. The sun is still shining. The table is still set. We still find ways to love each other. And well, yeah, there is still hope. There is wonderful hope. And I'm full of it myself here, joining you from the ragged, delicious coast of Maine, where I have migrated with my family. As John was saying, I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., in the Mount Pleasant area, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But first and foremost, I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for your interest in the oceans, your passion for being on them, in them, eating from them, sustaining them. It's something that I have devoted my life and career to. And well, I appreciate the camaraderie from all of us. So, and I appreciate the that my father and John connected and got this happening tonight. So with that, it is going to be a little more conversational tonight. I didn't want to give really a formal presentation. Well, I'm a little unfocused at the moment because I've got about 3-hour work days and I've got daycare most of the days as well. So just wanted to chat with you. And at the end of this, we'll probably talk for about half an hour or so, 35 minutes. And then to take some questions. So whatever you have questions about, economics on seafood to unicorn steaks and tilapia and who knows, just talk food in general. I'm happy to answer anything and also very much happy to hear from you and your comments and experiences because I know this is such a dynamic community of amazing people who have done really great things and get together to share those. So with that, I'm honored to be amongst you. So I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about the history of fisheries in America, referencing back to one of my books. And then I want to make the case for increased seafood consumption and talk about why that matters and talk about sort of where we are in the current day with a seafood economy. So that's a lot of ground to cover, but well, a lot of ocean to cover, I should say. But I'll start off with a little bit more about myself and my history, how I've ended up here. So as I mentioned, I was born and raised in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Washington, D.C., which at the time was Mount Not Pleasant at all. It was during the reign of Marion Barry, the latter reign of Marion Barry, when D.C. was experiencing great strife and trouble. But a huge portion of the neighborhood residents there were Ethiopian, Eritrean, Guatemalan, Honduran, mostly El Salvadorian. And very early on, I learned from them the power of food. And these were people that were largely fleeing civil unrest in their countries. And when you're running for your lives, you hope to take with you your health, your family, and your traditions. And well, these people brought with them the most beautiful of their traditions, and that was represented through food. We express ourselves, we teach our own genealogical mythologies, we invite others to the table when we eat. Food is the most powerful communion that there is, but also one of the most powerful expressions of ourselves. And that struck me very early on as such just a fundamental part of our world. That and the fact that we had family dinner 365 nights a year together. It was mandatory. And luckily, my dad, who did the vast majority of the cooking, is a really good cook. That doesn't mean things were fancy. It was often bird's eye frozen vegetables, but he has a way with salt and butter, and hey, man, things taste good. But we ate diversely, we ate well, we ate healthfully, we ate seasonally. And so food was an obvious path for me. I also understood that food is a sense of exploration beyond just culture. It's also a physical exploration. That in the little bodegas, which service the needs of all of these immigrant communities, I found decades ago goat meat and star fruit, carambola, and the heady, sultry spices of the Ethiopian markets that were just, boom! I mean, you remember, folks, Giant and Safeway weren't quite on par at that time. So the idea that food was different than the typical American available experience stuck with me and showed me that food is a way for us to quite literally explore our planet by importing things from the natural world, from all over it, onto our plates. So it made sense that I went into food. And as John was mentioning, I spent a lot of my summers down in the Chesapeake on the Patuxent, there channeling my little inner Ewell Gibbons. I was a boy who was more interested in what delicious could be underfoot or under wave than necessarily what was beyond the stars or the moon. And well, that has served me well in my career. I became a chef and worked my way around the world and up through the ranks. I was living and working over in Spain when a chef named Jose Andres called me home to come run Jaleo, a restaurant I'm sure most of you are familiar with downtown on East Street. And it was Jose and another gentleman by the name of Robert Egger, who is the founder of DC Central Kitchen, on whose board I served for near a decade. But it was Jose and Robert that taught me that a chef is more than the sum of ingredients we put on our plates, and that we are an important link in the chain of the human experience, and that there is a piety and a nobility to that. But there's also a responsibility to those that we feed. And I took that responsibility very seriously, the responsibility to sustain the guests who were coming through my front door. And as I graduated past beyond Jose, when I left Jaleo to start my own restaurants, I started Cafe Saint X and Bar Pilar over on 14th and T Streets when that neighborhood was still, well, largely empty. My flagship restaurant was Hook over in Georgetown, as well as Tackle Box. And I hope that some of you might have ventured in those places at one point when they were open. But my interest in sustainability grew from beyond just sustaining the people at the front door. It really became about sustaining the people at the back door, the farmers and the fishermen, the people that, well, enabled me to cook for you. And so sustainable seafood became, well, my passion and my calling, and how I organized my sense of food and cuisine. Now, at the outset, sustainable seafood was really, it was about understanding the impacts that our choices for dinner have upon oceans. And it was largely formatted in sort of typical environmentalism, which is kind of conducted in a bad human, bad kind of woe is us way. The conversations about, what we do wrong. Rather, I began to take a position that looked at, well, the human actor as the good actor. Because if by the choices we make for dinner, we can eradicate entire species, like the issues we were facing with Chilean sea bass or orange roughy or bluefin tuna. And also, if the choices we make for dinner can literally make our bodies sick, well, to me, that's great news, because then the choices that we make for dinner can also restore and they can heal. And so I began to see environmentalism and sustainability really about how do we increase the good that we do through the choices we make. I left restaurant industry. It proved that my interests were beyond what a restaurant platform alone could provide avenue for. I also had the incredible opportunity, I was named an explorer for the National Geographic Society, which is as sexy of a job as you can imagine it being. My job description was go somewhere, do something, and then come back and tell somebody about it. And oh, by the way, why don't you do some good while you're at it? Like, okay, and I get paid for this, and I get to wear a little rectangular golden halo over my head. I mean, wow, what a brand to be associated with and a part of. And also, what a way to learn. I went out into the world and found people that were eager to share their story with one of the most trusted brands there has ever been, the National Geographic. And admittedly, I set out into the world with a very white male point of view, which was, I'm going to go reduce the impact we have on marine ecosystems. I have all the answers. And well, that turned out to not be so true. And I very quickly learned that sustainability is ultimately, well, it's not just about minimizing the impact we have on ecosystems. It's about maximizing the impact that they have on us. And that the end result, the metric of sustainability, is the endurance of thriving humans. We are wholly dependent upon resilient ecosystems, but the bottom line is there's nothing shameful about admitting what we are trying to sustain as our ability to live where we do, to have the opportunity, economic opportunities that we do, to grow economic opportunities, to watch our sons and daughters thrive, and to create a legacy of stewardship. And that is sustainability. Therefore, I got very interested in public health as the measure of thriving humans. And for the last 6 years, for 6 years until about a year ago, I was the director of the Health and Sustainable Food Program at Harvard School of Public Health at the Center for Health and Global Environment. And there, my work and research and teaching focused on, the macro public health impacts of marine food systems. So looking at women's empowerment issues, looking at climate change, refugee status, looking at, of course, nutrition and access to good food. But in all of this, I have come to my mission in life, which is that I now want to get more people across all demographics eating more seafood. When I started off my career, it was about, hey, folks, let's fix seafood. But now, through my learning and exploration and listening to folks, what I've come to understand is that now seafood is the tool by which we fix humans and by which we set humans up to thrive. And so now I will make the case as to why that is. First, from an environmental perspective, seafood, we've always looked at the sustainability of seafood just with blinders on. Is this seafood sustainable or not? Which is very important to recognize. However, we need to also think about how we use seafood, which is in America as a center of the plate protein. Therefore, we need to measure its sustainability versus the other choices we make in that same context via beef, pork, chicken, lamb, veal, turkey, the things that we eat in America. And when we do so, seafood comes out on top every time when it comes to sustainability. And there's a number of reasons why. So from greenhouse gas emissions, land use alterations, so how much land is tilled under to our forest cut down in order to grow food, antibiotic use, fresh water use, and antibiotic use. And feed conversion ratio, so the amount of food we feed to fish to get food from them. Across all 5 of those metrics, seafood has a fin up on sustainability. And here's why. It's just biological efficiencies. You and me and pigs and chickens and turkeys and beef, hey, we're all fighting gravity. We're fighting atmospheric pressure. In order to do so, we grow big, strong bones and muscles and lots of connective tissue. We spend a lot of energy keeping our blood warm and feeding our brains. And fish, nah, dude, that's cool. I just float. They live in a buoyant environment. They're just a far more gentler existence, not without its, with pressures. But if we're looking at sustainability as a conversation about how do we feed this planet and her population, a growing population, we have to be thinking about efficiencies. And the ocean offers us great efficiency in terms of the environmental impact of the center of the plate proteins. Now that said, seafood, of which I want you eating more of, must be part of a vegetable-centric diet. The bottom line is we're never going to sustain this planet or ourselves eating meat or seafood. It's got to be mostly grains, greens, vegetables, legumes, pulses, the things we know we should eat with small, adequate portions of seafood. So that's one reason. That's the environmental reasons for seafood. The economic reasons, well, I live now on the coast of Maine, and I'll talk a little bit about this later in terms of the impact and import of fisheries, but also especially when it comes to aquaculture, look at the economic opportunities afforded by it, especially in developing nations where a lot of the world's problems could be solved by empowering women. And in fact, 70% of people employed globally by the aquaculture industry are in fact women. So I see the economics of fisheries as a direct means to invest in the betterment and augmentation of opportunity for many of us. And then from a health perspective, eat your seafood. I mean, this is so fundamental to our health. Not only do we need to address the fact that the typical American diet, rich in beef, pork, chicken, lamb, veal, and turkey, is killing us at epidemic levels, but also that seafood offers us an incredible healing opportunity and a means to maintain our health. So if you look at some of the numbers, by eating seafood twice a week, seafood rich in omega-3 fatty acids, we can reduce our cardiac mortality incidences by 36%. Now, cardiac mortality incidences are the #1 killer of Americans in a medical sense. So we can reduce that by 36%. That translates out to 55,000 American lives every year. Furthermore, a 17% reduction in overall mortality incidences. And this is not to mention any of the incredible cognitive development benefits that we get when pregnant and nursing mothers and young children eat seafood, adding up to 10 IQ points for children who are exposed, and their diet includes a lot of omega-3s. We have the ability that omega-3 fatty acids and the clean, lean proteins in seafood and all of the other micronutrients help to ward off diabetes, obesity. They help us to ward off depression, and they helped us maintain our cognitive abilities as we age. So seafood is so important to our public health that my colleague, Dr. Dariush Mozaffarian, who's I worked with, he was a colleague of mine at Harvard. He's now the dean of the Friedman School of Public Health at Tufts. He has a saying, he says, the 3 S's of public health. And if you don't remember anything from tonight but this, the 3 S's of public health: wear your seatbelt, don't smoke, eat seafood. Got that, folks? Cool. It's that important. All right. So that's my case for why we want to be eating more seafood. Let me talk to you now about what is standing in our way. And I'm going to start off with a little bit of history. And I'm also going to put just a direct plug in for myself. I'm really happy to be talking to you tonight and to present always amongst friends, but I'd also ask that you help sustain the sustainers. I'm an author. I've got a number of books out, and this book, American Seafood, is a cultural and culinary history of every single species landed in the United States. It's a deeply researched book. and visual essay that is truly comprehensive, and I write a lot about here the history of sort of fisheries evolved in America. And for all you sailors, if you ever need some ballast, this one works. It's also a great doorstop and makes a great gift. But in this book, I started off researching all the way back to Roger Williams' translation of the Algonquin language, reading John Smith's accounts of walking dry shod over the striped bass and sturgeon of the Chesapeake, of his accounts of the oyster reefs of the Chesapeake, sticking so far out of the water as to be navigational hazards, and the waters of the Chesapeake being as crystal clear as those of the Caribbean. I also read a lot about sort of the founding of this nation, William Bradford, for one, the first governor of the Plymouth colony. And this is where sort of the history of seafood as beneath America's aspirations, I will say, begins. Bradford, in one of the many plaintive letters that he sent back to England, many, at one point said about the second wave of arriving pilgrims, that there was nothing we could feed them other than a piece of fish or a lobster and a fair cup of spring water. As though that was such shame that they weren't better off or more situated agriculturally. And that just sort of sets the tone. And throughout history, shad and lobster in the early colonies were seen, if they were to be found in your family's refuse pile, it was seen as, quote, proof of moral failing. Whoa. Well, folks, I live on the coast of Maine, and I would say I've never met a community with a stronger communal moral compass than Mainers. And, well, we eat a lot of lobster, so I don't know if that initial evaluation was quite correct. But there's a history of sort of a bias and taboo against seafood. And though this country was founded on religious freedoms, we have long held a lot of religious biases that we still to this day haunt and trouble the soul of this nation. But the Catholic calendar had 150 fast days in it. And so the holy mackerel was aligned very closely with the Holy See and his holy flock, and came to be seen as a food of sacrifice, of penance. We also, in America, have such a foundation of the agricultural identity, the Jeffersonian ideal of the agrarian hero, and that land ownership is the surest form and pathway to political and economic prosperity, political stability and economic prosperity. So from the very beginnings of America, fisheries were sort of on the margins of the American way. And this even speaks to the Puritan work ethic, the tenets of regular scheduled work. But fisheries are itinerant. They are boom and bust. They are seasonal and cyclical. And so from the very outset, from a cultural standpoint, diving into some of these, initial communications from new America, you see that fisheries were already on the outside. So the numbers back this up too. The first year that there is data available for this on per capita consumption is from 1909, the first time we measured it. And that year, Americans ate 11 pounds per person of seafood versus 150 pounds per person in that year of beef, pork, chicken, and lamb. Now, over the past century plus, seafood consumption has increased only by about 5 pounds. We've topped out at 18 pounds per person, but we're really stuck around 16 pounds. And to give you some framework for that, we topped out at 250 pounds of beef, pork, chicken, lamb, veal, and turkey per person per year, and currently sit at well over 200. Also, to put the 16 pounds of seafood into further context, Americans eat 170 pounds of potatoes per person. And get this, we eat 140 pounds of sugar per person per year. Now, remember, the 3 S's of public health did not mention sugar, but they did eat seafood, and we eat nearly 9 times as much seafood, 9 times as much sugar as we do seafood. So there's some room to grow there. But also, fisheries themselves have changed. One of the big innovations in fisheries happened with the advent of the diesel engine, the steam engine, when for the entire history of humanity, we were fishing by our wits, by sail power, and by manpower. And all of a sudden, we were fishing by mechanical power. And this changed the entire nature of fisheries. And this also coincided with a massive population growth of largely Catholic immigrants to this country between 1900, or the end of the Civil War really, and World War I. About 50 million people, 30 million people coming into this country. And this was also the phase in America's history where we went from a rural country to an urban one. And so we see this massive shift that all of a sudden we went from a salt fish or preserved fish economy to now a fresh fish economy. This is so new in human history that the fish fillet, as in the fillet of fish that you buy at the store, wasn't available as a market form until 1921. That's when Americans first had access to that if you were not living directly on the coast or working directly with a fisherman. So all of a sudden, fish no longer look like fish. Fish are being sold far from where they were caught. The diaspora of the small boat, regional, seasonal fishery fleets was gone and was replaced by large-scale industrial fisheries as boats got ever more powerful. As we see through World War I and II, the development of military technology like sonar and monofilament radically altered, again, our ability to go find the fish and take of them what we wanted to, as opposed to all of human history, which before we were saying, here, fishy, fishy. So all of a sudden, we're in a different zone where people are disconnected from the source of their fish. They're looking at a fish fillet, not a whole fish any longer. We've lost that skill set. And then we breaded, when we cut them into fish fingers, breaded them and fried them, and then the fish didn't even have to have a name. It became a commodity. And it's largely stayed as such. Now, there were periods of patriotic duty when seafood was hailed as the home front victory food. But when the seasoning of patriotism was removed after the clarion bells of armistice rang, that consumption fell off again and has never picked up. So I'll sum all this part up by saying, going back to Bradford again, in another letter, he says, if the land afford ye bread and the sea yield ye fish, rest ye a while contented, for God will soon provide thee with better fare. So if that doesn't just show that it's always just been beneath our aspirations, then, well, we started at the beginning that way. So now to the modern day. Should we be fishing sustainability-wise? I mean, we've all heard some horror stories. We've read front page news that said fish, oceans are going to be just depleted in 40 years. Well, my answer to that question is yes. Yes, we should be fishing because we know that we can do it right. We've proven how. And America is leading the way in that. If the product comes from a domestic fishery, it is sustainable, or it is managed under a sustainable regime that is real-time responsive to best-in-class science. So we've proven we can fish sustainably. There was a recent paper by a colleague and friend, Dr. Ray Hilborn at the University of Washington, a meta-analysis of fisheries science data, which proves that under effective and enforced management, fisheries actually improve and are restored to abundance rather than overfished. So we've proven we can do this right. And UNFAO numbers show the same. You might have heard that 90% of our oceans are overfished or depleted, and oh, where are all the fish going to come from? Well, let's take another look at that number. If you break down the 100% of fisheries, you've got 33%, well, actually this year it's 36%, is fully fished, is overfished. You've got about 65% that is fished sustainably, and then you have 10% or so that is underfished. So if you lump fish sustainably with overfished, yeah, you get 90%, and it's scary. But if you just look at the language and go this way, well, about 70% of the globe's fisheries are fished sustainably or have room for further exploitation. So that doesn't make great headlines, though. that doom and gloom does. And that's what we tend to hear. The story of, no, everything is cool, it's going to stay just as it is not a sexy headline. So I get it that we don't hear this message a lot. But it's not enough that we just demand sustainably caught fish. We also, as consumers, have a responsibility to behave sustainably, right? It's not all on the fishermen. And here, I'll give you an example. Diversity. It's a big theme these days because, well, it is the fundamental underpinning of the success of any system. Bottom line, economic. Did you invest all of your money in one stock? I sure hope not. We don't do that. If you're talking about economic systems, if you're talking about cultural systems, if you're talking about biological systems, the cornerstone of sustainability is diversity. But in America, when it comes to seafood, we don't eat diversely. 95% of the seafood that we consume in this country is 10 species. Shrimp, tuna, and crab make up shrimp, tuna, and salmon make up 65% of our total consumption in this country. Just 3 species, right? That's wild. But if you drag a net through the water, what comes up with it? Well, a snapshot of an ecosystem. And while we may prefer cod, what about the haddock or the pollock or the hake or the cusk or the ling or the skate or the monk or the wolf or the dog or the eel or ray or pout or plaice or dabs or flounder or witchback or blackback or go on and on. And these are all just flaky white flesh fish, folks. And they're all caught right down there in the harbor, not 40 yards away from me. They're all flaky white flesh fish. And if you bake it in spiced tomato sauce, served over a brown rice and almond pilaf, flecked with a little bit of cilantro and topped with maybe some durkey onions on top. Woo! That's delicious. Wait, what was the fish again? It doesn't matter. Buy what's freshest and best. Buy what's abundant. Buy what the fishermen caught and the ocean can afford to give. When we walk into a grocery store or a restaurant and say, I want cod, we are creating an irrational economy that is based on demand rather than on supply. That's on us to change. And by the way, the reward for doing that is that you get a better piece of fish, very likely at a better price. It's that simple, folks. We need to behave sustainably to allow and enable, empower fishing communities to behave sustainably on the water. So with that though, fisheries have plateaued at about 90 million metric tons in terms of global wild capture production. We're not going to get more than that substantially. Sure, there's a lot of room for improvement, but bottom line is we can't look to the ocean's wild fisheries alone to feed the coming 9 billion people. Demand for seafood is expected to triple by the year of 2050. And that's due to just, well, economic factors of rising wealth, an increased importance or focus on healthy aging, of which seafood is a huge part. Also with climate refugee status and the fact that our world is changing, agriculture is becoming less and less stable, and people are relying more on the oceans. Now, a staggering figure about marine food systems is that though they provide us with 2% of our global calorie supply, 9% of the global population is wholly dependent upon fisheries for their livelihood. Fisheries are solely dependent for 9% of this planet's population's livelihood. And just imagine the importance of that. But we have to keep fishing because of that. We have to do it sustainably, but we also have to be farming fish. And when I started out my career, I was a farmed and dangerous, get thee back, devil, of farmed salmon. I was not in favor of it. And I was also a little undereducated about it. But I spent a lot of time being humble and listening and seeing an industry that is in rapid flux. Furthermore, a colleague of mine, Dr. Cynthia Jones, a great scientist, I sat on a panel with her at the Institute of Medicine on ecosystem services, and she did a wonderful paper at a VCU in which she did a yield percentage on if Americans were to eat every single piece of seafood that we caught in the wild here in this country, and that's including menhaden and capelin and dogfish and Atka mackerel, 4 very large fisheries. 2 of them are second largest, amongst the very largest. Even if we ate all of those species for an average yield, we only produce 60% of what our own government recommends we eat every day. So bottom line is, if we're going to be healthy, we have to be fishing and we have to be farming too, rather than just buying other people's imported fish. So at the moment, we do import about 90% of the seafood that we eat in this country. And that's not a bad thing. There's nothing inherently wrong with imported seafood. Some of it could be done a lot better, sure, but there's a lot of really great stuff that's imported. So I am not anti-import, but I am pro growing an industry under the responsible management that we have here in place. So aquaculture is a contentious subject, as I mentioned, but it's also the world's fastest growing food sector, and it also accounts for 54% of all the seafood that we eat on this planet. Wow, right? I mean, that's big, and it's growing rapidly. And the ability for us to expand that production is exponential. But as I've said, we've all heard horror stories about farmed fish, to the point where it just kind of represents an entire category to be avoided. But that's very much unfair to an industry that is incredibly diverse, as well as an industry that is really only 50 years young. So the first salmon net pen went into the water about 50 years ago. Sure, we've been practicing aquaculture for thousands of years on a sustenance scale, subsistence level. It's only become a global commodity industry in 50 years. And folks, 50 years ago, cars were unsafe at any speed. A computer the size of the Pentagon couldn't do what my iPhone can do from my pocket just when my butt is touching it. God, it's amazing how fast industries evolve. And aquaculture is evolving incredibly fast. The low-hanging fruit we have available to us, problems still to solve, it's amazing. But as a category, aquaculture is almost considered guilty before proven innocent. Seafood kind of at large is. And we need to change that. And I believe that that is a role that you and your community especially can really take a lead in. We know we can farm properly. We can do it sustainably. There are innovations that are coming forward that are astounding. There's a company called Veramaris who's using NASA technology around algae that are fermented and then used to completely supplement for fish meal and fish oil into the feed going into aquaculture. So we're taking an algae strain out of the Pacific Northwest, fermenting it in Nebraska, and feeding fish with it all over the world. That result in a full complement of omega-3 fatty acids, and importantly, a damn delicious fish too. You've got organizations like the Global Salmon Initiative, whose members represent about 50% of global production, and almost 75% of their production is certified sustainable by the Aquaculture Stewardship Council. Now, to give you some context, in 2013, there were 0 salmon farms certified sustainable by Aquaculture Stewardship Council. Today, almost 50% of global production is, in just 7 years. And they've cut antibiotic use by 70%. I mean, just amazing leaps that give me faith that in 5 years from now, this will be an industry that we don't even recognize today. And if you look at that exponential potential for expansion, a lot of alliteration there. A colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Haley Froelich out of UC Santa Barbara, did a paper on ocean hotspots. Now, a hotspot, say, for agriculture is Iowa or California's Central Valley, right? Places that are just suited. The ocean has spots that are just really well suited for aquaculture. And if you were to intensively and sustainably farm an area of the ocean, a hotspot in the ocean, equal to the size of Lake Michigan, we could produce equal to the amount of total wild capture fisheries. So in an area of the ocean the size of Lake Michigan, we could farm 90 million metric tons of seafood sustainably. That's insane. It is utterly insane. And to give you some context, Lake Michigan as a percentage of the ocean is less than 1/1000th of a percent of the ocean. What? Wow, if you're looking for things to invest in, man, aquaculture is interesting. And the last time we got to invent a food system was 10,000 years ago. And yet our generations are on the cusp. We are the architects and witnesses to the development of a new human food system. And if you look at that in a national scale, well, there's more America underwater than there is above it by a full third. Our exclusive economic zone, largest in the world, gives us the opportunity to expand into a new blue economic geography that is astounding in its scope. And if you don't think that people are paying attention and this is happening already, let me name some names that are getting into the game. Cargill, Monsanto, DuPont. They've seen the writing on the wall. They know what's happening to agriculture, and they're looking at 70% of our planet that is the ocean surface and saying, that looks pretty good. I had the great fortune of giving testimony on an invitation of Senator John Thune at the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee. And that Thune from Dakota, that Roy Blunt from Missouri, that Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota are focused on aquaculture. What does that mean? It means that we're finding alternative markets to sell American soy to, is what we're doing, that don't have Chinese tariffs associated with them. There's a lot of momentum here that is way beyond our control, and there's some powerful forces. And as I told Senator Blunt when he asked me, I said, Senator, your great state, the Arches, the call used to be go west, young man, but now it's go wet, young person. I mean, the new blue economic geography of America is there for us to explore, but it's going to take some effort on our part. And this is, I was saying, where you come in. A paper by Michael Rubino, who is an executive over at NOAA and the chief aquaculture advisor for the administration. He and his colleague Gunnar Knapp wrote a paper that said the biggest impediment to the increase of aquaculture is the lack of social license. Social license is the values that we perceive an industry brings to us as a community when we understand that industry. We don't give fisheries, and especially not farms, aquaculture farms, that social license. And this harkens back to how I began this presentation, with seafood being sort of beneath our aspirations, that though this country was founded upon the backs of cod and the men and women that fished them, giving us our first steps towards economic and political freedom, we turned away from the tempestuous waves of the North Atlantic to view a different ocean, one that ripples with the amber waves of grain. We turned inward. Our destiny manifested itself westward. And, well, if I ask you to close your eyes and to picture the small American family farm, American Gothic, the rows of perfectly patterned corn undulating off in, running off on undulating hills, bathed in autumn splendor setting sun. There's a white house with the paint chipping, a picket fence, a red barn with the color fading. Like, hot damn, we get this, folks. This is America. This is the thread by which the fabric of our nation has been woven. We get it. We think the land improved for our presence there. We look at a farm and see ourselves and our values reflected in it, the hard work, labor, and aspirations of the American family. But if I ask most Americans to picture a fishery or a farm, you might stand on a dock in your mind and gaze wistfully out at the wine dark sea and think that a fishery is something that happens beyond the horizon of our attentions, that happens elsewhere, executed by others. But to see a fishery, well, you know this intimately. You've seen it. I see it here every day, here in Maine. You stand on that dock, you turn around, and you see the mortgages on the houses. You see the quality of education in the public schools. You see the opportunities, the economic opportunities for a daughter to take helm of that lobster boat 6 generations deep in her great, 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 great granddaddy's boots. That is a fishery. That is a farm. It is the sum of the labors and aspirations of a community. And when we see it as such, we see ourselves reflected in it. We begin to give it social license that it has rightfully earned. We think land beautiful for our presence there. We think the ocean beautiful for our absence there. And if we are going to achieve a thriving human community, we need to rethink that positioning. We need to begin to see the nobility of men and women working on the water to provide food for us, food that sustains us, food that offers us an environmental choice we can be proud of, food that creates economic opportunities for everyone, especially women. And, well, food that'll keep you healthy, keep you around, keep you smart, and food that's also incredibly delicious. There is no food as diverse and as wonderful, as seasonal, as storied as seafood is. And so with that, thanks for listening. Bon appetit. I'd love to take some questions. Cheers. Cool.
That was amazing. I hope we have some questions for Bart. I was just awed by his presentation. It fits right in with where I think we should be going. I hope you can send chat messages for questions, or if we know who you are and you want to send something to me, I can unmute you to ask him questions directly.
So can I ask a question? I think am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. Hi.
Hi, Barton, it's Virginia Tippy. And I just have to say that was such a visionary and fantastic presentation to kick off our World Ocean Day. I really wanted to say that I, first of all, really appreciate you, taking the time to join us. But I also wanted to just ask you if you had what your perspective and your thoughts are about the need for protected areas, marine protected areas for the fisheries. I mean, you talked about, having those hot spot areas. We also need some hope spots, right? And I was wondering your thoughts in terms of helping to sustain the fisheries, if you think would be helpful.
Absolutely. Virginia, thanks for that. And I love the invocation of the hope spots as the hot spots. Sylvia Earle, who is the great champion, her deepness, who preaches the gospel of the hope spot. She likes to sit in the front rows of my presentation and tell me that it's all my fault. She's been a wonderful friend and champion and sparring partner. And her work is that of so many others around marine protected areas is absolutely essential. The bottom line is nature is not for us to use, it is for us to be a part of. And nature, I won't get into the philosophy of it, but nature deserves to be on her own course. And just, you need engines of productivity, no matter what you're talking about. And hope spots or marine protected areas are areas of the ocean in which human activity is non-impactful. We can sail over it, we can ship through it maybe, but otherwise nature is left to her own devices to produce in the radical abundance that she is able to. And we've seen hope spot, these marine protected areas work incredibly. I did some work and spent a lot of time over in Senegal and the Gambia. And I worked in a fishery over in Morocco for a while as well. And both of those were adjacent to marine protected areas. And the one in the Gambia in particular, the fishery had really been depressed for about 40 years due to just overexploitation. But then this marine protected area where just no one was allowed to fish and the mangroves were allowed to grow was enforced. And within 5 years, 27 species that had not been seen in those waters for 40 years were returning in abundance, that the fishermen were able to catch them outside of the marine protected area. And so here was this little engine, just this little popcorn machine churning out abundance for everybody around to take advantage of. When nature is left to her own resolve, she is amazing. And we see this time and time again. World War II, people weren't fishing as much because, well, U-boats. I get it. And if you look at the abundance figures after World War II, when we started fishing again, oh my Lord, were there a lot of fish in the ocean. Deepwater Horizon, same thing. We didn't fish for 2 years. And when we finally went back, there was more fish than anybody had ever seen. The ocean is incredibly resilient, and if we leave her to be so, we are the beneficiaries of it. And so these strategically placed hope spots, marine protected areas, are seen as a fundamental part of really good just philosophy on fisheries management, but also good practice. That said, the ocean is a commons, and as soon as you try to cordon off any of the commons, you get a lot of squeaky wheels coming out of the woodwork. And it's hard to balance self-interest versus communal interest, especially when the communal interest is in the hands-off approach, when there isn't a strong lobby for the benefit of. So, thanks. All right. So as a seafood, let me go to the seafood consumer. What are some good resources to know? We often hear about plastics in fish. What can we do to plastic-free fish, source sustainably? So yeah, a couple of things. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program, or their app, is really, really wonderful. And it can give you almost instantaneously a little snapshot context of what it is that you're buying. While I find that to be very helpful, I also find it more helpful to get to know and trust your retailers. There are few blanket statements that I would lay across the seafood sector entirely. One of those I mentioned earlier: buy domestically produced seafood. Not because I'm anti-import, but because, well, it has local economic benefits, of course, but also it's under a regime of management that is noted as the best in the world. And it is widely regarded. Monterey Bay Aquarium, everyone agrees that our management regimes here are the global example. So if you believe in the system, I believe you have to believe in the products of that system. And we're seeing results. Even fish like bluefin tuna, which is the poster fish of all that is wrong with human greed and fisheries, was in fact just listed by the Monterey Bay Aquarium for the Western Atlantic stocks as yellow list, meaning it's a good alternative. It is now no longer considered overfished. So we see real-time examples of management working, and that's why I support domestic fisheries and farming. But the Monterey Bay Aquarium app is great, but the blanket statement I would say is find the retailer that you trust. Whole Foods, Safeway, Del Hayes, which owns Giant, all do a really good job of knowing the source of their fish. One of the industry leaders on this is Walmart. McDonald's has been serving nothing but sustainable seafood, certified for 14 years now. There's a lot of good fish in the marketplace that flows through. Let others do the work for you. It's really complicated. It's really complicated. So find a retailer you trust, go with them. And if not, use the Seafood Watch app. And for your question about plastics in fish, I will say this is an issue of growing concern. I've seen a lot of headlines about it. I've read a lot of papers on it. Well, not too many, because there's not a whole lot. The bottom line is microplastics are in everything. And if you've seen headlines, we found it recently floating in the air of otherwise pristine alpine skiing villages. That's right, microplastics, 14 parts per million, floating, 140 parts per million, floating in the air of the Alps. Yes, it's in the ocean too. Yes, it aggregates in seafood through bioaccumulation. That said, I have not seen any studies that show any negative public health outcome from plastic pollution in seafood. That said, I'm not disavowing the importance of it. I think it is something we need very much to be aware of and thinking about. However, I have seen an overwhelming amount of studies that show the importance of including seafood in our diets. Walter Willett, the former chair of the nutrition department at Harvard, a guy I worked under and alongside, he claims that the lack of omega-3s in the American diet is an epidemic proportion crisis. So I've not seen any evidence to suggest that states that eating seafood with any plastic pollution in it has any detrimental impact on our health. Not eating seafood is killing us. So in this case, with the cost-benefit analysis here, I'm going to go with, I think we should be cautious and mindful and be eating seafood. That said, I think the real question here is to wonder why the hell is there plastic in our seafood, rather than to necessarily blame the seafood. And if there's plastic floating in the air in alpine villages and there's plastic in our oceans, what's the chance that there's plastic in beef and vegetables and chicken? It's pretty darn good. I haven't seen those studies, but I just don't want to convict seafood of something that is a universal issue across our food system, when in fact we need to be looking at that broader scale. So thanks, appreciate that. All right, and one last, could you speak about the food for farmed fish? Yes, that has been an issue in the past. The fish that we farm tend in the Western Hemisphere to be carnivorous. Carnivorous fish eat other fish. And in course, we have been feeding more fish to the salmon then yields us in return. And in a world of declining resources and increasing population, that sort of inefficiency doesn't cut it. However, now we've replaced a lot of that fish meal and fish oil, the fats and proteins, with plant materials. But the algae that I spoke of earlier is a very important innovation, as well as black soldier fly larvae that are coming to be seen as a very attractive alternative that also yield delicious fish. So that is innovating very quickly, and the names behind that are Cargill, Monsanto, DuPont, Spreading. So you're talking about companies with massive, massive market power and leverage and capitalization. These changes are going to happen. They're going to be very profitable. And so in this way, I see that actually the sustainable answer is in fact the one that the mega companies are behind. That's great. That's great, because Walmarts of the world can change the world. DuPonts can change the world very quickly. So, all right. Here in the Chesapeake, we have an invasive blue catfish. It's been impossible to make it available in seafood markets locally because it's wild. Any idea how you can get this delicious option into the markets? Yes. Call my friend John Rohrpaw at ProFish DC, one of the vendors that I used in my restaurants. They do a really great job, but they've shifted over to a home delivery and subscription home delivery service. They have done, and I mentioned him because he has done a huge amount of work in terms of getting that invasive blue catfish through the fisheries management programs, basically allowing it for it to be fished, but then also getting it into market. Now, blue catfish is invasive in the Chesapeake, but it is native to the Mississippi and waters south of here. It is a delicious fish. It is voracious and is overtaking the Chesapeake, causing great harm. I have heard reports of 2 fishermen that were fishing with a beach seine net, which is a net cast out from a beach and then hauled in by 2 pickup trucks. And they caught in one cast 60,000 pounds of catfish in a single hour. Whoa, whoa. And then sold it, I think, for 13 cents a pound because we weren't willing to eat it. But it is an absolutely delicious product. If you've been turned off to catfish in the past by muddy flavors or murky quality, this lacks all of that. In fact, has a bright, nuanced, clean, aromatic, almost floral flavor to it. So look locally for ProFish. I know there's also a couple of houses in Annapolis area that are cutting that periodically. So there you go. What would marine farming look like out in an ocean hotspot? It would look probably pretty mechanistic. It would be a series of rafts or an open net pen. And by mechanistic, I mean it doesn't jive with our current sort of aesthetic of the ocean. But that's why I was asking for us to reconsider that. if you picture that small family farm that I was talking about, with those beautiful undulating hills, perfectly patterned corn, the house, the dirt road, there's the barefoot kid, the dog running around. I mean, right, we get that. What's missing from that picture? It's the forest that was there beforehand. It's the prairie that was there beforehand. The human presence does a culture a place. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to be beautiful in time if we ascribe it that same social virtue. And that's that massive sea change that we need to affect. That you as leaders, as thought leaders in your community and active members of a maritime community can begin to discuss and expound and to live and to support. A mussel farm or an oyster farm, even offshore ones, the sketches that I've seen of that technology that's being developed, it doesn't look much different than all the lobster buoys up here in Maine. A lot more organized, a lot less annoying to your rudder, I'll tell you that, but a lot easier to avoid. But we accept buoys and we voraciously go ashore and enjoy all the fruit of that labor has to offer. I mean, people come here to eat lobster and to look out upon those buoys. Dang it, we hang the buoys on our house in celebration of that culture. We will do the same for aquaculture at some point. But if you look at, there's a picture that I can actually try and Google, and while you're on your computer, George Steinmetz seaweed farm. If you Google that, Steinmetz, Steinmetz, George Steinmetz seaweed farm. The fourth image that will come up on the scroll bar at the top is seaweed farms up in Guangxi in China. And you look at that, yeah, it looks crowded, but it also looks kind of beautiful if you see it through the lens of the family farm, of the food production, and offer it that nobility and social license. So I know I'm harping on that a lot, but it is the most fundamental thing that we need to address when it comes to fisheries. So, all right. And then one last question there was, which of my cookbooks do you like the most? Why, thank you. The one that you buy. Just to be able to catch, there's a beautiful moth that just landed on my book. Except for the fact that that is a brown-tail moth, and they have caterpillars that are not so good for us. So my most recent book is called The Joy of Seafood. This is the compendium to American seafood. So American seafood is not a cookbook. It is the cultural and culinary history of every single species landed. Incredibly well illustrated. In fact, one of your other speakers that you've had, Jay Fleming, a young man, a photographer there in the Bay, provided a lot of photographs for it. But so that I consider the owner's guide for seafood. It tells you everything about seafood, gives you some inspiration, and just it's good maritime culture and all that. And then this is the user's manual, The Joy of Seafood. So it takes all that knowledge and it packs it into about 1,000 recipes that meet you where you are. It's designed to basically enable you to go to the store, ask the question, what's the catch of the day? What's freshest and best? Come home with anything you're recommended, and then find a recipe in here that you can cook very likely out of things already in your pantry. If you've got capers, lemon, white wine, you're probably at the top end of complicated for the recipes in this book. Very much not a chefy book, very oriented towards Tuesday night home cooking. So, all right, well, last question there. In addition to your books, how can we tune into your ongoing presentations? Well, thank you. I appreciate that question as well. I also built an online school called seafoodliteracy.com. It's my mission to get more people across all demographics eating more seafood. And the way to do that, I found, was to educate chefs who until recent months were the primary source of seafood in America. 70% of seafood is eaten outside of the home. in the United States. So I built an education program to fill the gap in what traditional culinary education lacks in terms of seafood. It's a 15-hour accredited course. We partnered with NOAA and their Fish Watch program. We partnered with the James Beard Foundation. So it's pretty legit, I like to think. But as part of that, seafoodliteracy.com, every Thursday, I host cooking webinars at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And you can, if you follow me on social media, you'll see links for those go up every week. This month, we're doing a shellfish series. So crab is up next this Thursday at 2 p.m. So join me for that. And we've archived all of those presentations as well. So you can go back and see any of them. And I talk about the fish themselves, the culinary aspects, sustainability aspects, purchasing aspects. My wife is the camera woman. We do it in my home kitchen here. We have a lot of fun. And it's very engaging, interactive. So, hey, thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Looks like the last question. We're just a few minutes over time here at 8 p.m. and the sun is just setting on the ragged, delicious coast here of Maine. And I've got a 3.5-year-old little kid squid I'm going to go put to bed soon here. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Bart. It was a fascinating presentation. Really appreciate your time for doing this. And we I got a lot out of it, and I'm sure everybody else did as well. I'm going to turn it over to Virginia for any closing comments.
Well, first, I just want to reiterate, this was such a visionary and interesting presentation. Thank you so much, Barton. You know, John said at the beginning when we talked about who would be the great speaker for World Oceans Day, I said, if you're talking seafood, there's no better person than Barton Seaver. And as John mentioned, he first heard about you a couple of years ago and out sailing, good place to learn about the seafood. It's expert of the world here. I learned about you back when I was working for the federal government in Washington, D.C. And I think it was 2009, you were Chef of the Year, Esquire's Chef of the Year. And of course, us D.C. folks, you know, that work there in D.C., we always loved your restaurants, but that was pretty cool. But what was fantastic was when you put out your very first book for Cod and Country. And I just want to tell the audience that book made a sea change in the ocean policy world. I mean, truly, Barton did a phenomenal job of increasing public awareness of the importance of sustainable seafood and the importance of us thinking about what we eat and what we do in our actions. And if you ever get a chance, I definitely am not going to go out and buy your new book, Barton, but I also want to recommend folks get a copy of your Cod and Country for Cod and Country. It really is so true. The tragic collapse of the cod fishing industry it was a wake-up call to some, but Barton put it all in perspective. And anyway, highly recommend Cod and Country as well. But I'm going out and buy that American seafood too, because I already have Cod and Country.
Well, if I might ask a favor of you all too, if you do choose to support our books and our work here, if you please ask your local booksellers to carry it and you know, talk to them about the importance of this, because it does take a community. As I was saying at the beginning of the presentation, this is not a conversation that is just broadly held, even around the dinner table. And you know, I've created some assets that I think seed that conversation, and I would appreciate your support and help in helping to expand it. So Virginia, thank you so much for your kind words. I appreciate that. And I will say that I was set on a good path by a father who knows delicious, who taught me how to cook well at his side, who nourished my soul and spirit in a great family environment. And I see that he and Carol might have joined here at some point. So yeah, maybe I am trying to rack up some brownie points here with Dad, but Dad, I love you. You did right by me and I appreciate it. We're in a good place and doing work I hope you're proud of. So thanks. And thanks to you all.
And thanks again. And I just wanted to say, John, I know we all want to just thank you for bringing Barton to our audience, and also remind everyone that this is a kickoff for our world celebration of World Ocean Month. The whole month is World Ocean Month, the month of June. And in fact, this week is World Ocean Week, and there's lots of stuff going on. And I know our various community partners have had a chance to hear some of the activities. But at EYC, we're planning to celebrate the whole month with, seafood specials and, ocean drinks, special ocean drinks to just bring attention to the oceans and to the issues. And of course, we're excited that we'll have next week, we have actually a kickoff of our junior sailing bay stewardship program where we take the kids out, they learn about sailing, but they also learn about the bay and about crabs and about various issues. And then in the end of the month, we are planning on the 20th of June, we're going to have a trash fishing tournament, big competition to try to get some of that trash out of the water around our local area waters and of course around our marina, but it'll be a fun event. So I want to just encourage the Eastport Yacht Club members as well as our community partners to join us for some of these fun events in the month of June and to celebrate World Ocean Month. And also just let's all eat seafood the right way. And thank you again so very much. Really appreciate it, Barton.